first speaker, Stephen Hicks. Well-versed in running, well-versed in doing triathlons, spending time with family, however, losing sleep over placing second in a school spelling bee. So we've got his talk here, Misadventures in SEO, how to self-sabotage your documentation. Everyone, Stephen Hicks.
Thank you. So they asked me for fun facts before we started, and I'm like, I can't think of any fun facts. I'm just not a very fun person. But then I was walking out to lunch through the high school. Did you know that this is like a high school? Like, can you tell? And all of a sudden I flashed back to high school traumas. So I thought maybe for the next 30 minutes we could just relive all of my high school trauma. I could tell you about the time that I cheated on a chemistry test my junior year, and my teacher looked over my shoulder but didn't bust me on it for some reason. I don't know why. Or I can tell you about the time that I got made fun of in 9th grade for being like 4'9" by all of my locker mates. It was great times. Or we can talk about this. Just a quick thank you to all of you for being here. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks to the sponsors. My name is Steven. It's written as Steve. You can call me Steve. I don't really care. Doesn't really matter. If you want to get in touch with me after this, or you want to make fun of me on social media, stephenhicks.me/where is where you can go find lots of places to do that. If you are interested in the slides that you're going to see, you can go get those on the internet now at self-sabotageyourdocs.stephenhicks.me. That's a kebab case or hyphenated on the self-sabotage your docs. I work at a company named Camunda. Camunda is a platform for automating and orchestrating processes and getting microservices and things like that interacting in a stable, reliable, dependable manner. Camunda used to be based in Berlin. It's now remote. I don't live in Berlin, I live in Milwaukee. And for Camunda, I am a developer experience engineer. There are at least 2 other DX engineers here. We all do different things. For me, being a DX engineer basically means I do documentation infrastructure. I don't write any of the docs. I have Christina right here to do a lot of that for me. I give the documentation all of the engineering love that it deserves. So doing things like archiving unsupported versions of the documentation, or customizing our documentation platform, or improving the collaborator experience so that Christina can interact with our product engineers who also write a lot of the docs more smoothly. A couple years ago at Camunda, we made a pretty big change with our product. This was a move from focusing on you hosting in your own environment, in your own infrastructure, we call it self-hosted, to us focusing on hosting it for you in our cloud platform, our SaaS offering. This was a version jump for us. So we went from Camunda 7, that's what that C7 means. I'll say C7 a lot throughout this talk, that's what I'm referring to, versus Camunda 8, version 8, C8. Along with that change in focus and the new version number, we also published a whole new set of docs. We rebuilt our docs completely. The older documentation had been built with Hugo. Just for my, own curiosity, is there anybody who's using Hugo to build their docs in here? If I may see some hands. I see probably about 10 to 15 hands scattered throughout the room. Our new docs are built with Docusaurus. Is anybody using Docusaurus to build their docs? It's probably about the same number. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. With these 2 different versions of the documentation, my team, the developer experience team, we made the decision that we didn't really want to support, even though the product was fully supported in this older Camunda 7 self-hosted focused version, we wanted to focus our efforts on this shiny new documentation, the C8 documentation. So that we are a small team. We have 4 people on our team, 3 of us that are really focused on documentation. We didn't want to spread ourselves across both of those. So what we wanted to do with the C7 documentation was basically put it in a box and shove it in a closet and let it collect dust and cobwebs. And we wanted to keep it that way until something went wrong, and something did go wrong. So the story that I have to tell you takes place over a few years. This is a timeline that starts at the beginning of 2021, goes through 2022. More things happen after this, but for right now, let's talk about the beginning of this case. If you had gone to the C7 documentation at the beginning of 2021 and done a search for the term BPMN, which is an acronym that stands for Business Process Modeling Notation, you would have gotten I would guess, about 20 results that were really helpful. BPMN is a core part of the Camunda product. Basically, when we have you automate and orchestrate a process, you build or you model that process using this technology called BPMN, which is visual, and behind the scenes is represented as XML, and then our engine can take that XML file and interpret it and run the process. So we know that there is a good amount of documentation on the site about BPMN. It's an absolutely core component for us. Somewhere around March 2021, I say somewhere, actually I know the exact date because there's a PR associated with it. But at the beginning of 2021, something happened where things started to degrade. And at the end of 2021, we started to get some complaints from users on our forums that basically said, hey, your search doesn't work very well anymore, which was a little bit vague, but accurate. At this point, if you had done a search for BPMN, you probably would have gotten half the results that you had seen previously. The complaints were kind of vague. It was things like, search isn't as good, the docs aren't returning the same results that they used to, the search experience seems to be degrading, and those diminishing results were really inconsistent and hard to isolate and hard to figure out what was going on. So, since we had those C7 docs sitting in a box in the closet, we left them there. We were kind of like, it's fine. It'll be fine. Everything's fine. And then it wasn't, because you get to summer of 2022, and we start to get complaints from our own support team that says, hey, we literally can't find anything in the search right now. It's completely useless. It turns out that what the support team actually had done, which I think is just like a testament to the power of the human mind, everyone on the team had built their own internal memory structure of where the documentation was. So when they would get a call from somebody about, I don't know how to do this thing, or I can't figure out how to read about this thing, they would just search through their index and find it and tell them where it was. Horribly frustrating for everyone. But like I said, BPMN is absolutely a critical part of our product, and we know that those docs are out there, it's just that no one could find them. And so that was when basically I set aside all of my work as a documentation infrastructure person and decided to investigate this and figure out what was going on. A couple things that I should tell you about the C7 documentation. The first one is that our insight search on this documentation site is built on a Google programmable search engine. I'm very proud of myself for being able to say that out loud. So what that means is that's basically an API wrapper around Google search. There are a lot of customizations that you can make to a programmable search engine, 2 for 2, like setting filters and aggregating different sources and all sorts of things that you can customize there, but we don't really do any of that. We literally serve you what you would get if you went to Google. So when you go to Google and you search for BPMN, you'll see the exact same results that you would see if you went to the C7 documentation site and searched for BPMN in the header. Throughout the talk, I'm gonna mention Google, and I'll say specific things about the Google search engine. A lot of the things probably can be translated to other search engine providers, but I'm specifically going to continue to call out Google because that's what affected, or that was the impact in our story. The second important detail, first not important detail, is that I totally messed up all of my slides and picked the wrong version number. It's actually 721 is our latest version. But the second important detail is that our documentation for version 7, there is a lot of it. We have documentation that's live for every version since we released it 10 years ago. So from version 7.0 up through 7, we're just going to say 22, even though I got it wrong. 0 up through 722. Every one of those versions is available online because any user could be using that specific version of the product and be stuck with a specific problem to that version. So that's 23 versions, 0 through 22. And then we have 2 more. The latest version is basically a mirror of 7.22. And then we have another version develop, which is what will become 7.23. So that's, 25 versions, 24 if you count correctly. We continue to ship a new release of this product every 6 months, and with that comes a new version of the documentation. So this number of versions is just continuing to grow also. A funny thing about maintaining many versions of documentation, if that is your experience, is that there's a lot of duplication across those versions. So in our C7 docs, we might have a page that is at the path BPMN, and it exists at every one of those versions, 7.22 down through, say, 7.0, and it evolves slowly over time. You move from 7.21 to 7.22, maybe there are no changes in that particular file. And if you do, it's often the case that if you do want to see significant differences across two versions of the same file, you have to look pretty far across the versions to see that difference. And this duplication is absolutely the star in our story. So let's quickly talk about how content duplication is handled by search engines, because that's going to be critical. The internet has a lot of duplicate content. Some of it is malicious, like somebody who scrapes another website and then serves it as their own without crediting the source. But most of the duplicate content on the internet is perfectly altruistic. It's things like syndication to reach broader audiences, or it's a product page that exists in multiple different categories that you can get to it different ways. You never see, well, I won't say never, you rarely see pure duplication in Google's search results, because when Google's search engine robots see duplicated content, they choose one as canonical. We're going to use this metaphor of a canonical robot arm. He points that arm at the prettypony.com website, and he sees that one as the source. So that when you search on Google, what you will see are the results from the canonical source, not from every source that has this content. To decide which version of the content is canonical, Google is going to piece together a story about how your page fits on the internet. It uses a lot of signals to identify which one of the duplicate pages is seen as the source. Things like which page is linked to more. So if more of the internet points at yours as the source of truth, you're going to get more credit for that. The more it looks like the rest of the internet trusts your site, the more likely you are to get that canonical robot arm pointed at your site. There's even a way to set a hint on a page to suggest to Googlebot which one we think is canonical. The link rel canonical tag will basically allow us to say, hey, Google, we know this is duplicate content. The one that we think is the source is this one. And this will help Google build the case for your page over the others. So you can imagine with a documentation site containing a lot of versions that look largely the same over time, and a lot of pages on the internet pointing to all of these different pages at a different time, you can see that Google would have a hard time choosing one of these over the others. But it eventually does choose one. And for our sake, we hope that it chooses the latest version and points that robot arm at 7.22, so that when you search in Google, you will get the results from version 7.22. Just as likely, possibly even more likely in my experience, Google will point that canonical robot arm at an older version because there's more of the internet that points to it as the case, as the source of truth. In that case, when you search Google, you'll get that older version in the results. And so you might be wondering, so Google is not serving the right version of the docs. That doesn't sound like what you described, which is that your docs were not searchable at all. What's missing? And this is where we talk about that mysterious event on my timeline that I know the exact date of. It's March 2021. When we introduced a PR that we thought would help Google choose the correct version, what we consider the correct version, the latest version of our documentation, and only ever give that in its search results. In fact, what it did is it caused Google to serve no results for us. And that crime is that we introduced the no index directive on every version except the current version. So I heard some laughter, so I think that some of you are familiar at least with the no index directive. What it effectively does is it will use this orange caution tape metaphor to say this page should no longer be indexed by Google. So if I were to search for this exact page in this exact version, I should get no results found, and that's how Google will handle that for you. And so we figured that what Google would do, like why would I point to a page that isn't indexed? That seems super silly. And we figured Google would just point its canonical robot arm at the latest version because all of the others were not indexed. And it did that for some pages. But for most of the docs, it did the absolute worst thing possible. It could crawl all of the older versions. It knew what was on those pages. It knew it existed. It knew how it fit into the rest of the internet. And it said, hey, you know, really, 720 is the right page here. And when somebody searched for that, because the canonical robot arm was pointed at a page that was no indexed, they would get no results found. Honestly, because we literally told it not to index that page. It's our own fault. Amplifying this problem was that our insight search was driven by the same programmable search engine that we talked about. So when you searched the results on our site and saw no results for BPMN, you got the exact same situation when you went to Google to search for BPMN. No results found. And that is how we completely sabotaged our search experience. It was one thing to figure out what had happened and why, and it was a whole nother adventure trying to figure out how to crawl out of that hole. We did eventually. We started with the objective of convincing Google that the latest version should be canonical. And we didn't know how to do this. And if you've ever had any sort of SEO problem in the past, the feedback loop looks a little bit like this. You basically do an experiment to see what happens, and then you wait for weeks, possibly months, to see what that effect is. You look at that effect, and then you analyze it and say, okay, what's the experiment we're going to run next month to see what happens? We could never really find any clear guidance on this exact issue, even reaching out to Google. So it became this horrible, horrible, inefficient loop of just making tiny changes, sitting and waiting, and then looking to see what happened. This is a summary of the experiments we ran. There's too much information there, don't read it all. The top half really talks about crawling. That was kind of our first, ideas, basically how can we get Google to crawl reliably so that we can tell it what we want it to crawl. We were honestly unsuccessful with all of the crawling experiments. And so then we moved on to, okay, fine, let's not worry about crawling, let's just get all the canonicals pointed the right place. Even then, we were unsuccessful. The majority of the pages that we tested were unaffected. Some of the pages were fixed, but just as many were not fixed. They were either made worse or they were just broken in a different way. It was completely unpredictable, completely unrepeatable, terrible, terrible time. A lesson in patience and resilience for me. So on the verge of giving up, we decided on one last experiment. This would be our most patient experiment of all, a half-court shot. We had noticed in the past that Google seemed to do a significant recrawl of our docs right after each released version. We had not had a lot of luck convincing Google to crawl on our terms, but we thought maybe we can rely on this every 6-month big recrawl after a fresh version was published to go crawl everything, and if we knew that that was coming, we should make sure that everything was set up perfectly so that Google would be foolish not to see that the canonical version of every page on our documentation site was the latest version. So we tried to build this comprehensive story to try to influence Google as much as we could. And in practice, this meant 3 things, or really 2 things with one crossed off, but we'll talk about that. First of all, setting canonical hints pointing at the latest version from all of the previous versions. Our sitemap that, well, actually we couldn't even submit it at first when we first experimented because it was broken. But eventually we had submitted sitemaps that had different versions in it, and we decided, no, what we really want is we want to give it one sitemap that only has the latest version. That's all it has. And then there's this third thing that I crossed off, remove no index tags from all versions. I had wanted to remove the no index tag, but I constructed an experiment to look for positive results afterwards, and it seems to fail. I think it was just a poorly constructed experiment. But since we didn't see any positive effects of that, we decided, okay, let's just hold off on that. Let's see if we can get it to work with just these first two significant changes. And then we waited. Months later, we released a new version of the product, and we published a new version of the documentation. And then we submitted our updated sitemap to Google, and then we waited some more. And then it finally worked, and Google finally agreed with us. This is basically what we had constructed. We had all of our no-indexed pages were now pointing canonical at our 7.22. The sitemap was only included the 7.22 version. Google decided, you're right, 7.22 is the correct version. I'm going to point my canonical robot arm at it. And now when you go to search and you search for it, you get the latest version of the documentation. We saw a trend very quickly towards the latest version of the documentation being indexed. And I think it was probably a month or so before I saw 99% of the pages had been indexed correctly and had been fixed. Most importantly, people could find things again. So this is a note from someone in our support team. This was a pretty common occurrence of basically someone being like, I completely even forgot that C7 search could work. So this is really magical, a magical experience for me. So the takeaway, if you are running a documentation site with multiple versions and you don't want to relive the experience that we did, if I could put it in one sentence, it's this: build a comprehensive and cohesive story about the canonical source. In practice, I say three things. One, point your link rel canonical hints from old versions to latest version. This looks a lot like that slide we looked at before. Sitemap containing only the latest version. Do not give it a sitemap that contains versions that you don't want indexed, or content that you don't want to be canonical, I should say. And then I did put in here, don't no index older versions. Even though my experiment failed when I had run it earlier, I still think that this is the better way to go about it for two reasons, really. One of them, Google explicitly, literally tells you do not use no index as a means to influence canonicalization, which is how we accidentally did it. And then the second thing is, what's really worse? Think about what would be worse if an older version was considered canonical. Is it worse that a user sees that older version when they search? Or is it worse that they see nothing when they search? By the way, we're calling this mascot of our team Doc's McPuffins. It's like Doc McStuffins, except Doc's because it cares about documentation, not boo-boos on stuffies. And McPuffins because it's a puffin. So I mentioned earlier how we have two sets of documentation. We have the crusty, old, musty C7 docs, and then we have the shiny, sparkly C8 docs. After we figured all this out with C7, we wanted to go back to our C8 docs and make sure that we weren't going to relive this experience. So with all of our learnings, I took a closer look at our C8 documentation. There were a couple of significant things that came up. So if you are running a documentation site built on Docusaurus, here's a couple things to watch out for. For starters, Docusaurus by default will list all of the pages in your sitemap, and therefore every version if you're doing version documentation. The sitemap is another one of those signals that Google uses to identify the canonical source of your docs. If you tell it every version is important, that's like saying nothing's important. There is a pretty easy way to resolve this in Docusaurus. There's a configuration setting for ignoring specific paths. We wouldn't have known to use that setting if we hadn't experienced this, to know that we should go make sure that none of these other versions were there, but it's a pretty easy thing to clean up. The more significant issue is that Docusaurus sets self-canonicals on every page out of the box, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's not going to cause an error of any sort. But you can see how telling Google that every version of this document is the canonical source is basically like saying nothing about the canonical source. 8.5 is as important as 8.4, is as important as 8.3, is as important as 8.2. And as Google SEO, I don't know, guru John Miller says, if you've ever had an SEO problem at all, you're familiar with John Miller. Self-referential canonicals do nothing. I absolutely took that out of context slightly for the shock value. But he does say that they do nothing when they are truly self-referential. What that means is a self-referential canonical can be helpful when there are things like query string parameters in the URL, and the visited URL does not match the canonical URL. But in that case, it's not truly self-canonical because you're truncating the query string params off of it. That's not how we use our docs. We don't have any query string parameters in any of our documentation site. I don't know if it's how you use yours, but if that's something to watch out for, be aware. So by setting self-canonicals on every version of a doc, we're not really helping Google out. I have already seen some pages where, before fixing this, we had some older versions of pages that were seen as canonical. Docusaurus does supposedly offer a way to override this at the page level by specifying a canonical URL in the front matter of the document. However, at the time of my investigation, that actually didn't function properly at all. And so we ended up doing something different, also because I did not want to have to set a canonical URL on every single page. So what we did is we just wrote a little, customized a little bit of Docusaurus so that each page will automatically declare a canonical based on the newest version of that same path. So on the right side there, if I have a BPMN document and the path hasn't changed since 8.2, then the 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, 8.5, all of those are going to point canonical automatically without me doing anything at that 8.5 BPMN page. On the other hand, if on the left I move a page called DMN, that stands for data modeling notation, in the 8.5 version, I consider that like the top of a stack. So 8.4 becomes the top of that stack. And so everything below it will point canonical to that. If I want to change anything after that, I have to, or if that's not correct, then I need to add some canonical hints to the metadata for my pages. If you are interested in seeing how we did this, I have a write-up about it here, stephenhicks.me/camunda-canonicals. You can also go to these slides afterwards and click on that link. Click on that link. Who cares, right? AI search is super more important than SEO, than traditional search engines at this point. Honestly, writing this talk was slightly weirdly depressing for me because I kept thinking about how I had spent a lot of time digging into a specific confusing problem that I was so deep into it, and I just thought, I can't wait to figure this out so that I can share it with the world. And then when I came up from air to share it with the world, everyone was like, hey, have you heard of SGE? It's replacing SEO. So we have like AI-based search is more interesting than classic search, and SGE, search generative experience, is more interesting than SEO. SEO, is it dead? I don't know. Is it dying? I have no idea. Maybe you know better than I do. But it certainly seems like it's taking a heavy blow. Having said all that, there are always lessons and things that transcend whatever the technology is. So the takeaways that I have from it, that it doesn't matter whether we're using SEO or SGE or how we're searching for our docs or any of that. Building a comprehensive and cohesive story, I have said that multiple times, but this is from what I've read about SGE, is also going to be rewarded when choosing an authority. Build a comprehensive and cohesive story in your documentation so that it's clear when we try to serve up some sort of search results or some sort of generated response. Explain things clearly and thoroughly, which I super need to tell you all because we're at Write the Docs, and none of you know that, right? But again, this is something that, from what I have read, SGE will also reward this when choosing an authority. And finally, document and share your learnings, because it's a nice thing to do, and I don't know, maybe SGE rewards it, not really sure. But if somebody had documented this exact problem in a way that I was able to find it and read it, I would not have spent as much time trying to figure it out and had to go through this experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen Hicks, everyone. So we are hopping right into our Q&A with these gorgeous leather chairs, not for sale.
So nice. Did you say they are for sale? Or
They
not
are
for
not.
sale?
They are not. I shouldn't
we
say
can just
things
take
like it's off market here. So we're gonna pull up some Q&A. Thank you so much for the talk. It's always interesting to hear from documentation engineers, folks who are working behind the scenes to make sure that the content is going out the right way. We've got quite a few questions. So awesome. We'll go ahead and kick this off. First one here. Loving the illustrations.
Thank you.
Dennis Dawson's talk, big reminder there. Did you make them? If so, what was the process like to make so many different ones for
my gosh.
your talk? Yeah,
Is my microphone still working?
it's solid.
Okay, good. Can I show you? Is that cool? Yeah, please. Can you just like stick it on my ear better?
It wasn't solid, my fault. I just lied to your face by mistake.
How's that? That's perfect. I'm sorry, this is like not what you wanted for an answer, but I can actually show you because I painted them all on paper, and then I photographed them, and this is all like part of, I just really like painting, but I also never really do it unless I force myself to have a project. So I'll just share with you, if I can figure out how to get it there. These are my photos from it. Oops. Yeah, so these are like all the illustrations that I painted, just on paper. And then I had that little orange thing in the back here. This is just like a little frame that I set up, where I set up a little tripod with my phone next to it and took pictures of it just to get a consistent photograph, consistent white balance, consistent color across every single photo. And then halfway through, I don't have my phone on me, my phone camera broke, like the lens cracked. And so I was like 2/3 of the way done. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And what happened is I cleared away enough of the broken glass, and it worked fine. So yeah, let me.
Excellent. That's incredible.
Thank you. I don't know how to get back to my slides. It probably doesn't matter.
I mean, I appreciate having the
Whatever.
make sure.
That's what you're stuck with that photo now.
Oh, it is no longer solid. Again.
That's me. You done? Oh no.
We can share this mic for the.
Yeah, let's share that one.
Yeah, for the meantime. So yeah, another question here is popular. How did you navigate the downtime with you and your team while you're waiting for these solutions to come into play?
I mean, multitasking, honestly. So it was a lot of set the experiment, let it run, go do something different. The good news is I had like 300 other things to do. So it was honestly a lot of waiting around and then just setting reminders for myself to go back and check on it.
Yeah, and then I am sure you had a huge list of things to take care of afterwards. So you're just like, well, next task, we can get to it. Did you look at the search terms people were using to find out your documentation? Like, did anything surprise you about what they were looking for?
I can't think of anything that really surprised us in terms of the search terms. I think it was a little bit informative in terms of us trying to identify what are the pages that, if a page goes missing, and we know that it's a pretty popular one, what are some search terms that we can use to find it, to test it, to say, basically, to use that as our test case. So if I knew that one particular page was out and then I saw the search terms that would lead to it, I would just capture those and say, okay, I'm gonna search for this. And if it doesn't go to anything, then I know that the experiment did not work.
Awesome, and really easy to document that and have metrics like, hey, these things aren't working specifically. Did you use Google Search Console to assess those results? Or were you looking to assess the outcomes from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I did have a slide that I ripped out for time that I talked about the specific error messages that come from Google Search Console. That's actually how we figured out what was going on, was by reading the error messages from Google Search Console. Like, read the message is often the best way to do it. But they were very clear about what was going wrong. It was just then us trying to figure out, oh, wait, why does it say that this page is no indexed? Oh, because it is no indexed. And oh, it's because we put it there.
Very fun to discover that. So here's this question. Anonymous, very popular today. SEO can feel like forbidden magic. Where did you do your research to figure out how to fix this specific site?
I don't have a good answer for this. I wholeheartedly agree that it is black magic, and I don't really understand. I will say that John Miller, who I shared his name up there earlier from Google, has he and his team do a bunch of office hours recorded on YouTube, where they just have, like, they respond to people's questions about specific situations or specific problems that they're dealing with related to SEO. And I watched a lot of those videos and scrolled through looking for it. They do a nice job of adding the table of contents so you can see every question that's added or asked. That's probably where I spent most of my time. That, and also Google's documentation was pretty thorough. And if you knew what to look for, or you read it correctly and it was the right thing to read, it was helpful.
Yeah, shout out to if any of you have worked on that specific documentation here. Thank you from Stephen here. Was there a lot of empathy involved internally with this mistake? Did they feel like that was something they would have made the same mistake as well?
I'm not sure I totally understand that. I'll ramble on about empathy. I mean, I kind of alluded to it a little bit. Like, I feel like we lacked a little bit of empathy at the beginning of the reports from the users. We were a little bit gaslighty, and I'm referring to myself, honestly. A little bit gaslighty, like, it seems fine, I'm not gonna worry about it. Like, so it went down, it's fine, don't worry about it. I look back on that moment and feel a little bit bad. And then I think the other thing I'd say about empathy is, I mean, it's a mistake, you know. We made a mistake, and internally, I think that we all do a good job of like knowing that I'm not the one who made the change that put everything into a no index mode, but I understand why you would do it, and I can totally understand going in there and thinking this would have this effect, because why would Google be so silly to point canonical at a no indexed page? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but.
I wrote that myself, so it was more just like if someone else on another team was like, oh, hey, that's cool, we all make mistakes, or were they just like, hey, you got to get this fixed because tomorrow we've got a deadline?
So to that, I will say I had to get it fixed because I wanted to get it fixed, and definitely I think our team feels that empathy towards users who are struggling, or our internal, you know, it's not that those people are worth more, but when it's your coworker and it's somebody saying to you, this is impacting my job, it hits you more quickly, more directly. Yeah.
And very strong empathy when it's just like lighting a fire that you already wanted to get away from. That makes sense. This last question I think we have time here for. Curious about your decision and experience in migrating from one doc platform to another. How did you convince the company to go from Hugo to Docusaurus?
I cannot answer that question because I was not there to make that decision.
Oh yeah, there we go. So, with that, we've cycled now, so we can go back. We got a couple more then. Does Google completely ignore non-canonical sources? If you know the insight to that.
It's a good question. I think that it does. I actually don't think that I know the answer to that. I would think that you could still get to a specific page that isn't non-canonical by providing the exact right search terms. But I take that back. They ignore it because it would be marked as not indexed because because Google chose a different version as canonical, or a different page as canonical. No.
Awesome. If you'd like to answer one more, even softball question that we can just pitch here. You mentioned SEO overtaking SEO. SEO, is there an effective way to leverage both? Not a softball question. That's not a softball. Oh, sorry, the four-seamer here.
You know what I'll say about that is that I have seen already multiple sessions, including, I think his name was Marco, was that who was in here during the lightning talks? Manny, I think, has a session that's talking about RAG and AI search and that kind of thing. I've seen multiple talks in there, and I think that those are probably better people to talk to than me.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Again, Stephen Hicks, everyone. You can catch him today